Hello, this is Steve Miller. Today's training is how to use Appium to automate Android in an emulator browser environment. So the first thing that I'll do is let's show you what the final lesson will look like the final product of our automation. So I have the Appium server running here, and then I have an Android emulator. It's one of the ones that came with when we did the installation in the previous video for the step-by-step for installing Appium DMG. So I'm going to start with Ruby simple.rb, and it'll walk through and it'll open up the web browser. Then we find the elements and we type in our search, so Stephen Miller, Dented Ghost, Appium. Wait for 2 seconds, and then we'll go ahead and click on the search button and give about 5 seconds for the search results to display and close, and then test was successful. So in the training today, that's what we'll do. We'll walk you through all the steps that you need to do to be able to automate on the Android browser using Ruby along with Appium. So for today's training, one of the prerequisites is that you have Appium with Ruby properly installed on your machine. If you don't, I would suggest going and watching the Appium step-by-step installation with Ruby on Mac. Similar videos. There's the iOS Safari simulator, which walks through, which has a lot of the same pieces here. Actually, a lot of the code minus the cap statements is exactly the same. So if you walk through this one should be a little familiar. And if this is your first one, I'd recommend watching that after this to see the difference between Android and iOS. Tools that we'll be using, the Android or Appium DMG version 1.3.6, Android Studio, Android SDK Manager, Emulator, 64 ARM, Terminal, Text Edit, and the Chrome browser. So to begin, make sure that you have Appium up and running, and then open up Terminal. I would also open up Android Studio, and then open up Chrome. So next we're going to set up a folder structure, and we're going to do that in Terminal. If you don't have Terminal open already, you can just go ahead and search on Terminal, and then go ahead and click and open it up. And then to make a folder structure, go mkdir, and then I'm going to store all the tests for the training in Dented Ghost, and then I'm going to go into that directory. And so to go into that directory, cd Dented Ghost, and then I'm going to make a directory inside of there to store the Android browser emulator automation. So mkdir Android browser emulator -simple, and then we'll go into that directory, and I can do tab to autocomplete and then go into that folder. The next thing that we need to do is we need to set up the gem files, so the libraries that we're going to be using. And we're going to be using the Appium lib, and we're going to be using the most current version as of right now, which is 7.1. Again, you can go out to Ruby Gems and you can get a history of the most current Appium lib, and right now that is 7.0. And so what we need to do with that is we need to go ahead and we need to create a gem file and a gem lock file. And I'll walk you through those steps, but one of the tools that we need to use is we need to use text edit. And I want to make sure that you have text edit set up in a way so that it doesn't give you some weird characters. And to do that, just search on text edit and then go ahead and open up TextEdit. I'm just going to say just done here. And then under TextEdit, go to Preferences. And make sure that you have plain text here. And then make sure that you have all of these unchecked for defaults. And then go ahead and close it. Okay. So then we're going to come back to Terminal. And we're going to say bundle. Init, and that will call bundler, and with bundler that will set up our gem file. So we'll say bundle init, and you'll see that it created our gem file. And to confirm that, we can just type ls, and now we see the gem file. To go ahead and edit that, we're going to say open-a text edit, and then gem file. There we go. So this is the default gem file that is created when you run bundle init. And this is what we want. So we will change this. We'll remove the comment. Remove that line. And what we're going to do is we're going to add gem, single tick quote, Appium, underscore lib, single tick quote, comma, single tick quote, tilde, arrow 7.0.0, single tick quote. And then we'll go over and go File, Save, File, Close. And now we have updated our gem file, which acts as our configuration file. Now we can use bundle install, and it will read that configuration, that gem file that we have. And so in that same directory, just say bundle install. And now it goes out to Ruby gem, and it grabs the Appium lib and all of the dependencies and then now we're going to code the very first part of our automation, which will be opening up the Android browser and then calling a specific URL. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and create a Ruby file to hold our automation. And to start out, in terminal, go ahead and say touch simple.rb, which creates an empty Ruby file for us. Then we're going to say open-a text edit space simple RB. And now we have an empty text file. At the top, what we want to do is we want to include the libraries that we need. And to do that, we'll use the require statement. So we're going to say require Ruby gems, and then also say require Appium underscore lib. Next, we need to configure our call to the Appium server. And we do that by sending our capabilities file as part of our call when we instantiate the Appium driver. To get more information on the availability of what you can actually send to the server, you can go to appium.io, and they have a reference guide which will show you. And here's some of the things that we're using. We're using the platform name, and specifically for us, we're calling Android this time. And then we're also using the platform version or the mobile version. And here we're also using device name, which you can see here. Device name is actually the emulator that we're using. And then underneath browser name, there's the different options. And for us, using the Android emulator, we're actually using browser. So we'll go ahead and just copy this. And and paste. Okay. Now what we want to do is that we want to instantiate the Appium driver. And then from that we actually need to grab the Selenium driver and pull that out from the Appium driver. And to do that, the first piece that we do, here, I'll just go ahead and type this. So at Appium driver, and you can call this whatever you want, but I think Appium driver does a good job of describing what we have right now, colon driver dot new, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass in our caps or our capabilities. Now one of the things that we need to do is we actually need to go ahead and grab the Selenium driver, because Appium itself doesn't actually support the get method that we need to actually go ahead and call the URL. So we actually have to utilize Selenium to do that. And so we'll go ahead and say Selenium underscore driver equals, and we'll use our Appium driver underscore driver dot, and then we'll start the driver. And that gives us access then, and we actually have access now to both the Appium and the Selenium driver, which is needed for doing mobile web. Okay. Now the next thing that we want to do is we're going to go ahead and promote the Appium method to a class instant method. And why this is important is when we call things like, let me pull this up here. So when we call things specifically like a method called find element, if we have not promoted the Appium method to a class instant method, we actually have to each time say the Appium driver dot in the specific method that we want to call. After we promote to the class, then we can just go ahead and directly call the method by saying, like in this case, find element. So let's go ahead and promote that. And then we want to call the Google URL. And to do that, we will call the Selenium driver, or we'll use the Selenium driver dot get, and then the specific URL that we want. Now what I'd like to do before we actually run it, I'd like to actually deep dive a little bit into how we came up with each one of these. Now let's find the device name. To get the device name, you can go to terminal and go Android AVD, and that will give us the Android Virtual Device Manager. And here's the emulator that comes installed with the default configuration that we had installed earlier. And the AVD name is where we get our device name. Later we will also need the API level, so keep that, or remember that piece. Now we can actually from here go ahead and click start, and that will start up the emulator. And for doing automation, it's actually easier to start up the emulator. You can do it from the code and it takes a little while, but if you pre-start it, it actually runs faster and seems more reliable for me. Okay. And while that's loading up, once the emulator's up, we're going to go ahead and our Android version. Alright, I fast forward. It takes a little while for it to boot up. Swipe across, go to settings, and then page down until you get to About Phone, and then click on About Phone, and you'll get the Android version, and that's what we will use for our platform version. Now, next what we want to do is get the browser name. And to get the browser name, we go to DevTools, page down to Package Browser, and then you'll see here we have the name of our browser, which is simply Browser. So now we have all the settings set up. What we want to do is we want to apply those settings over here within Appium. So we'll go to the Android icon, and what we're going to do is we're going to check Use Browser and then pull down, and you'll see that we have Browser there. The next thing that we'll want to do is we're going to make sure that we have the right emulator and have that checked. So we check that, and right now we have the Nexus 5 available. Our platform is Android. Our automation is Appium. And finally, what we'll want to do is actually get the platform version. You'll see all of these. 5.1 on mine wasn't listed, so I had to come in here and type 5.1 and then API level 22. And now that we have that, again, click here and then click back just to make sure everything is properly saved. I'll clear this off, and to test it, we'll go ahead and say launch. And then here's the command that it sends the Appium server. We're running version 1.3.6, and we got a 200 OK. So our Appium server with Android is up and running properly. Now what we want to do is go ahead and run our Ruby program that's going to open up the Google browser. You notice here I have the Android emulator up and running, and so it's still running here. So not to close it down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go open up another terminal, and I'm just going to go shell, new tab, and this will open it up into the same directory that I was at. So I can do ls, and I have the gem file, the gem lock, and the simple RB. So I'm going to say Ruby simple RB, and you can see over here it's connecting to the emulator. And it opens up google.com, and it's done. So that again was our basic automation, was just to open up the web browser. The next piece that we need to look at is actually how to find these specific elements, because what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to click here and then be able to type in the search, and then we want to be able to click on the button after we've typed in the search results. And so we'll walk through the steps using actually the Chrome browser to identify those elements and then add them back to our code. For mobile web, I prefer using Chrome after switching the user agent to inspect and find elements for mobile automation. And if you don't have it already, there's different user agents. The one that I'm using, you can get by going to More Tools, go to Extensions, and then do a search for User Agent Switcher. And you can do that by going there and then typing in User Agent Switcher and then installing it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new window. And then I'm going to pull this down, and I'm going to select an Android Galaxy S3. That should help us for inspecting. It should be similar to the other Android device that we are emulating. And now we have the mobile experience. Sometimes with user agent it gets stuck and you have to clear it out or hit reset or try switch between user agents until you get to make sure that you're in the mobile setup. So now what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the inspector tool that Chrome has built into it. And to do that, go ahead and right mouse click and say inspect element. And I'm going to expand this out a little bit. Okay. And you'll notice now, and sometimes you do have to say inspect twice, it doesn't catch right away. But you'll notice here now that we're looking through this and there's class, but if at all possible, we always want to grab, especially with mobile web, we want to grab the ID. One is when Appium actually searches through the page for elements, IDs actually have a higher performance. The other thing is IDs are supposed to be unique on the page, so we don't actually, because sometimes with other tags you can have multiple versions and you don't know which one you're selecting. So adding an ID allows you to uniquely identify. And then if you ever end up using like XPath, the page structure can change, which makes your automation brittle, because as soon as someone changes one of the structures, your automation can break. So really do strive to find something unique. And there are times where IDs don't work, where you have to, like an auto generated ID that won't work. But really do try to use IDs, or at a minimum maybe name and some way to uniquely identify it in the page. And so we did find the ID here, and so we can go ahead and say edit HTML, and I'm going to grab that ID right there, and then I'll go back to our automation and I will just put a comment and search box. And paste that there. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and see, how do we uniquely identify the search button. So again, inspect elements. One of the things you'll notice here is that it just gives us div class, but actually if you page up here, the button tag actually encompasses the whole thing, so we can utilize that too. And again, if we look along here, once again we find an ID. So we can grab that ID. I'll go back here and search button. I'll just paste that there. So now we have our ways to uniquely identify the search box and our ways to uniquely identify the search button. So to finish it up, we're going to add a sleep. And the reason to add a sleep after the selenium.driver.get is to allow time for the page to load and also provide additional reliability. And as part of the demonstration, it actually makes it easier to see. But you can work through that and see if you actually do need a sleep when you're running your automation. Now what we want to do is, now that we have the specific IDs that we have, we want to go ahead and find those specific elements and then act upon those elements. So for search box, what we'll do is we'll say element equals find underscore element and then colon and the specific ID. So our ID matches here, comma, and then the value that's associated with that ID. So LST-IB single tick quote, Now that we have that specific element, then we're going to call the methods associated with that. And so what we want to do, especially on a web browser, is you don't always have focus. So we want to make sure that we have focus on that specific element before we start typing keys. And to do that, we'll just say element.click. And after we have focus on it, we can go ahead and say element.send underscore keys, single tick. Here I got Stephen Miller, dented ghost, Appium. Which will pull up a lot of the stuff that I'm working on now for training. Then we're going to go down to the search button. And before we do that, just so, because we'll type this and then it would automatically click really quick. So purposes of the training, we're going to add a sleep here. It's not necessarily needed, but it will allow us to see the text, give a little pause, and then see us click on the search button. And so to actually click on the search button, we'll use similar here. We need to first find the element. And so we'll say element equals find underscore element. And again, the unique identifier. So ID, comma, and then it's TSBB. And then we're going to go ahead and click on it just by saying element.click. And similar to what we had up here, we're going to give a little bit of time for the page to load, and also part of it is for the demonstration. So when you do run your automation, initially you can see its work and actually see the results load. After we have that, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and clean everything up, and do that by saying driver.quit. And just for reporting purposes at the end, we'll go ahead and say test succeeded. So if we get to the end of our tests, we will see it printed out to the terminal. Then go ahead and go File, Save, and we'll now have our automation complete, and then we can go ahead and run it. We still have the Android emulator up and running, and that started right here. So one of the things that I'm going to do so we don't close that down is I'm going to open up a new tab. The nice thing is when it opens up a new tab, it opens it up in the same directory. So if I do ls, you'll see I still have the gem file, the lock file, and the simple RB. So I'm go ahead and minimize this. Again, we'll just look real quick, just verifying that we have everything set up. And I'm going to clear this out just so we can see it's run all the way from the beginning. So I'll say launch. And now that it's up, I'm going to go ahead and say Ruby simple.rb. And so now you can see it's opened up the browser. We found our element, and now we'll go ahead and type in or send our keys, and we'll see right there, send the keys across. We'll wait for 2 seconds and click and display our search results for 5 seconds. Close down the browser, and test succeeded. So as a quick summary for the whole process, we required our libraries, we configured our Appium call to our server, we started up an Appium driver, but we had to also call the Selenium driver so that we could actually call a URL. We promoted the object so that we can call the methods directly. We found the specific elements And here we were able to actually find the IDs. After finding the element, we performed the actions that we wanted on it. Here, a click and send keys, and here a click, and then we closed up and quit the driver after we'd used it. So thank you very much for watching the video. If you would actually like to download the code directly, you can pull it from the blog, or you can go to GitHub and go to github.dentedghost and go to the Appium training matrix, and specifically for this video, the Android Browser Emulator simple. Thank you very much for your time.